Let's talk about the New Teen Titans. The New Teen Titans were actually my favorite comic book back in the days when I was collecting comic books. I haven't talked about them on this channel before yet because I haven't had the opportunity. When I was living in Vietnam, I didn't have any access to any New Teen Titans comic books. But now that I'm back in the United States, I was able to track some of these down through interlibrary loan and revisit my childhood favorite. So if you'll indulge me a little bit, before I get into this particular volume, I'd like to talk about the New Teen Titans in general and my history with them. The New Teen Titans were, I believe, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, the best-selling comic book that DC had during the 1980s. But I never heard of them until the 1990s. Now, I can often be quite out of it, so take me with a grain of salt. But in my defense, in the 80s and 90s, I don't think you would have been familiar with the Teen Titans unless you were collecting comics, unless you were reading comic books, because they were not yet in the mainstream media at that point. They were very popular in comic book circles, but they weren't on TV, they weren't in movies. Now, of course, all that would change in the early 2000s when they would get a cartoon and a TV show and then another cartoon TV show. And at this point, I think there have been multiple TV shows about the Teen Titans, and probably everybody knows about them. But when I first got into comic books, I had no idea who the Teen Titans were until I stumbled upon one of their issues in the bargain bin. Now, my history with comic books, I've told this story a few times before on this channel, but basically, when I was a young child, 7, 8 years old, I didn't have access to comics. I lived out in the suburbs where I was separated from any comic book shops. My parents disapproved of superhero comics, so they certainly didn't buy them for me, and I didn't have any money with which to buy my own comics, even if I had access to them. So I didn't really have access to superhero comics until I was about 15. I had some mobility at that point. I had a little bit of pocket money just from doing some paid chores around the house, and I decided I wanted to start collecting comics. And the first place I went to was the bargain bin, because that's where all the bargains were. At that time, you could get 3 comic books for $1, and they were all old issues. The first time I went into the comic book shop with some money, intending to start collecting comics, I just picked up a bunch of issues at random. And one of those issues was one of the New Teen Titans. I read that issue and I immediately fell in love with the New Teen Titans. I decided I wanted to read all the comics that were in this series. So I went back to the comic book store and went to the bargain bin. And as luck would have it, at my comic book store, there was a lot of New Teen Titans comics in the bargain bin from the 1980s. So I was able to buy a lot of those old issues. And even though I had not been reading them in the 1980s when they were at the peak of their popularity, I caught up with a lot of these issues a few years later, reading them in the 1990s. And again, this was before they were on TV. This was before they were really mainstream. So I had the sense at that time that I was discovering something that nobody else was talking about. Now, other people were talking about them. I mean, the Teen Titans were, again, one of the best-selling comic books that DC had during the 1980s, but nobody I knew was talking about them. Nobody at my school or in my class at high school was reading Teen Titans comics. And before the internet, if you were into some of this nerdy stuff, you were a bit more isolated. It was a little bit harder to find your tribe. So I felt like I had a certain kind of ownership of this property, as you do at that age when you kind of discover something for the first time. And then, of course, later it would become mainstream. But yeah, the New Teen Titans, let's talk about this maybe briefly before talking about why I found it so appealing. So the Teen Titans, the original Teen Titans, was a group that was created in the late 60s, and went on into the 70s, which was the teenage sidekicks of all the superheroes. So Batman's teenage sidekick was Robin. Green Arrow's teenage sidekick was Speedy. Flash had Kid Flash. Wonder Woman had Wonder Girl. And Aquaman had Aqualad. Now, comic book fans out there know it's a little bit more complicated than that, especially Wonder Girl's history is a little bit convoluted. But let's not open up that can of worms just now. Point being, they were the teenage sidekicks of the main superheroes who had their own comic book that I think did reasonable numbers in the 1970s before it ended up getting canceled. Now, Marv Wolfman and George Perez resurrected the Teen Titans in the 1980s with the new Teen Titans, in which they brought some of those characters back, and also created some new characters for a different team dynamic. So, for example, not all the original Teen Titans were back. Robin was back. Kid Flash was back. Wonder Girl was back. But Marv Wolfman decided he didn't need Speedy. He decided Speedy was essentially just the same character as Robin, so if you have Robin, you don't need Speedy. Aqualad as well didn't come back. I think the reasoning was Aqualad, of course, was tied into the ocean, so it was a little bit harder to integrate Aqualad into the stories. Although both Speedy and Aqualad did come back frequently as guest characters. And in fact, in this very volume, we find Speedy. Let me see if I can find a good picture. Speedy actually comes back for several issues in this very volume. Here we go. Speedy is back, but so is the Brotherhood of Evil. So he shows up in issue 29, which is the second issue in this volume. And he actually stays with the Teen Titans for several issues before he gets busy and then he has to leave again because Speedy is only ever a guest star in the new Teen Titans. Yeah, here he is. A few issues later here. I'll have to say my goodbyes. Aqualad also shows up as a guest star briefly for a couple pages before disappearing again. So of the original Teen Titans, some of them were on the new team and some of them just showed up as guest stars. But the new team also had some new characters on it. So Raven and Cyborg and Starfire. And the intent was by recreating this team with some old characters and some new characters to bring in some good old-fashioned teenage drama with characters who had different personal problems and love triangles and make it a bit more soap opera-y. And it worked. It was very popular during the 1980s. And like I said, I fell in love with it immediately upon reading only one issue. So the characters themselves are interesting, immediately likable. There's great writing by Marv Wolfman, and as everyone points out, George Perez makes these characters just look very appealing. They just look like kind of interesting characters that you want to know more about. And they all have dramas. So there's a big soap opera-esque part to the Teen Titans that is always there in the background, but in some issues becomes a little bit more prominent. For example, this first issue in this collection here, number 28, I'm starting here with volume 5 just because this is the first volume I could get a hold of at my library. I'm going to play around with Interlibrary Loan and see if I can maybe track down all of the old Teen Titans issues, or Teen Titans collections, or as many of them as I can, and maybe try and do them in some sort of order going forward. But for the moment, we're jumping in with issue number 5. Collection number 5, which starts with issue number 28, originally published all the way back in 1983, February of 1983. It's almost all soap opera stuff from the first issue. So there's Starfire, who is in love with Dick Grayson, a.k.a. Robin, but he's been quite distant from her. And she feels that the relationship is strained. Wonder Girl tries to explain this to her, saying that Dick is under a lot of stress because he's constantly trying to live up to Batman. Wonder Girl has her own relationship with an older man, Terry. I forget Terry's last name, but he is a professor at a community college, and he is also going through a divorce, or has gone through a divorce, but it is still arranging some of the custody issues, etc. And he has an ex-wife who shows up to interfere and makes Wonder Girl, Donna Troy, feel uncomfortable. Cyborg, where is Cyborg's issues here? Cyborg is... okay, maybe that spills into the next issue. Cyborg is in love with a girl, but she actually has other commitments in her life which are interfering with his romance. Sorry, I can't find the panels I'm looking for at the moment, but you'll just have to trust me on this. Raven has all sorts of problems. She's the daughter of a demon, but she's also in love with Kid Flash, or Kid Flash and Raven have this romantic relationship going on. Where at the beginning of this collection, he starts out in love with her, but once he gets a vision of her soul, he becomes convinced that she's pure evil and then becomes repelled by her. Beast Boy has all sorts of issues going on as the series runs, but in this collection, the issue is that he's taken an affection to Tara, who is the new character in this collection, and is the newest member of the Titans, but Tara has all sorts of issues going on. And of course, if you know anything about the Teen Titans, you know that Tara is going to set up to betray them. And I don't really... that's a bit of a spoiler. Actually, there's going to be lots of spoilers as I go through this. But I don't think I'm giving too much away by this, because it's set up almost from the very beginning that she's an untrustworthy character. And by the time we finish this volume, it's going to be established completely that she is working for the bad guys, although the rest of the Titans don't know that yet. So this is set up for the Judas contract, which is when Tara betrays the rest of the Titans, which is, I think, the most famous story in the new Teen Titans history. So the personal melodramas, or the soap opera-esque part of the new Teen Titans, I think is that's the hook. That's what I think brings in new readers. I think that's what got me after only one issue. And obviously this kind of stuff is a little bit cheesy, but these hooks work great when you're younger. When you're 15, you kind of think all this stuff is a lot more dramatic than it actually is, maybe. The thing that, so that's the thing I really loved about the new Teen Titans from when I first discovered them 30 years ago. The thing that I thought was, I didn't love so much when I first started reading the new Teen Titans 30 years ago, and which I was reminded of when I came back to it, is it could all get a little bit weird. I don't know. The complicated personal lives or melodrama of these characters, I can get into that. But the weird magic stuff when they're fighting the villains, I thought that all got a little bit too strange. And there's a couple reasons why this is going on. One is the villains themselves. The Teen Titans were often fighting a lot of villains who had like a lot of weird magical powers. So here when they're fighting the Brotherhood of Evil, these characters have the weird ability to do a lot of magic stuff. So you get... The confrontations with the villains aren't a lot of clean, simple fights. There are a lot of weird magic stuff going on. But then the character of Raven herself is tied up with mysticism and magic because she's the daughter of a demon and she's got like a soul she can't control. And so any story that centers too much on Raven immediately gets really weird and strange. And I don't know. What do you guys think? I want to say that these kind of storylines were more popular in the 80s than they were in the decades before or since. I mean, I think the X-Men, which was like the new Teen Titans counterpart over at Marvel, both series were very popular in the 1980s with similar different demographics doing similar type stories. The X-Men also got really weird and magical at points in their run. It's not my favorite cup of tea. I would prefer more of action-based stories when you're fighting the bad guys rather than these weird psychological type stories. But a lot of the Teen Titans stories from this era, in this volume, and if memory serves, in the years before and after, were these weird psychological type battles. Now, there is some more traditional action mixed in with that as well. But when it comes to my fondness for the Teen Titans, this is one of those things that I like the Teen Titans in spite of this weird stuff, but not really because of this weird stuff. But I wonder if that's just me. Maybe it's just me. Perhaps the original audience for this type of stuff really liked it at the time, and maybe that was one of the reasons that the Teen Titans were so popular in the early 80s. But anyways, this particular volume collects 8 issues from February 1983 to August 1983, and including the annual. Now, if I had to make a criticism of these reprints, it's that these volumes are too small. And I guess I can't complain because I'm getting them for free from Interlibrary alone. But, you know, I still have to go through the trouble of searching for them and requesting them, etc. And I'd kind of like to get a little bit of a meatier copy in my hand. This is, I mean, it's all right, I guess. 212 pages. Okay, it's over 200 pages. I can't complain too much, but you know, it's just 8 issues here. Now, granted, the annuals are a little bit longer, But why not make it an even 10 issues or 12 issues? Give us a whole year of Teen Titans. It would still be quite manageable in a binding. They publish a lot of graphic novels that are longer than that. So, yeah. So it's a little bit shorter than I would have liked, but I'll have to request the other volumes through interlibrary loan and talk about those on another day. So this issue opens with Tara, the new character, who I believe had been teased in some of the previous issues, but this is the first issue where she really became center stage. A lot of the personal drama going on here. There's this weird supervillain group, the Brotherhood of Evil, which I believe was originally a Doom Patrol villain, but had been imported over to the New Teen Titans. In the early issues of these New Teen Titans, a lot of the mythos, or a lot of the characters and plot lines from the Doom Patrol got imported over, because the Doom Patrol ended up actually getting canceled prematurely in the early 1980s with some unresolved storylines and plot threads. And I think there was a connection between the creators of the New Teen Titans and the Doom Patrol. I might be wrong about that. So they're fighting these Doom Patrol villains and also getting introduced to Tara. Oh, yeah. Here are the issues with Cyborg I was alluding to earlier. So he's in love with Sarah, but he meets Sarah's fiancée here. And finds out that the woman he thought he was in love with is actually engaged to another man, and this creates Cyborg's melodrama. Now, as these issues will progress, we will discover that it's actually a little bit more complicated than he thinks at first. But, and that's another one of the soap opera type threads that's going through this. So yeah, there's the fights here with the Brotherhood of Evil. I guess this is an issue with comic books in general. But the Brotherhood of Evil, after being the bad guys, the antagonists for several issues, just kind of disappear without much stuff really being resolved here, without even really being definitively defeated. And then we go on to some other plot lines. Thunder and Lightning, who I think make their first appearance here, will go on to appear sporadically throughout the early run of the New Teen Titans. A mystery about who killed Trident, a little bit of a murder mystery here. Now, throughout these issues, Robin, Dick Grayson, is also teaming up with a cop who has unorthodox methods named Adrian Chase, and that's going to develop as these issues go on. The Teen Titans are also fighting a character called the Terminator. Now, in retrospect, having a villain named the Terminator seems very cliche, but I did look this up, and the Terminator, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, didn't come out until 1984. These issues are from 1983, and in fact, the Terminator makes his first appearance, if memory serves, in issue 2 of the New Teen Titans. So that was back in, 1981 that he made his first appearance. So even though it does seem very cliche and cheesy to have a bad guy named the Terminator, this was actually before the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. I actually had a few of these issues back in my youth and when I was collecting comic books in the early 90s. And again, I found them all in the bargain bin. I had this issue. If memory serves, the copy I had a coffee stain right here on the cover, which is probably how it found its way into the 3 for $1 bargain bin. But I had that. I had some of these other early issues as well. So some of this is a reread for me, although I did not have all these issues. So this is my first time reading through these with no gaps and seeing the complete storylines play out. But anyways, the Terminator shows up to fight the new Teen Titans. And Tara fights the Terminator, but then it's revealed here at the end of that issue that Tara is actually secretly on the side of the Terminator, and she's working with him to get information on the Titans, and that's going to become a major plot line in the issues going forward, which will play themselves out in Volume 6 and I think maybe even Volume 7 of these collections. And then Robin is working with, again, Adrian Chase, who is using unorthodox methods to pursue the mob. And Adrian Chase has a family. We actually get introduced to his family in earlier issues. Let me see if I can find the panel. I might not be able to find it when I'm looking for it. Anyways, it's established in previous issues that he has a wife and a couple kids he's very fond of. Can't find the panel right now. Robin and Starfire come in and meet his kids. But then Adrian Chase, after going after the mob, gets a mysterious gift from his Uncle Arthur. Uncle Arthur? My God, Doris, I don't have an uncle. Boom. Good Lord. Chase. Now, we've got some blank space here, but if memory serves, in the original issue, which I had at one point, it said something like, continued in Teen Titans Annual #2, where you will see the birth of the vigilante. No, I actually never had Teen Titans Annual #2. That one wasn't in the bargain bin, so this is my first time reading it. But we see that Adrian Chase is pushed into becoming the new superhero, the Vigilante, after his wife and kids are killed by this explosion, and he is nearly killed himself. So I believe this is what they call a spin-off. The superhero, the Vigilante, is then introduced in Teen Titans Annual #2, but goes off and then has his own series. The Vigilante's story is as you would expect. His wife and kids are killed by the mob when they try to assassinate him. So then he goes on to become a new type of superhero, which is, let me find it. Here he is. He becomes a new type of superhero who is not afraid to use lethal force against the criminals. Which all sounds a lot like Marvel's Punisher character, doesn't it? And I should have looked this up before I filmed this video. I don't know which character came first, the Punisher or the Vigilante. But I guess whichever one came first, I guess it's safe to say these characters were in vogue at this time in the 1980s, huh? And then that's the end of this collection. And that's also the end of my time. The camera I'm using has a 30-minute limit on the video files, so I'll have to end my commentary here. But I hope to get more Teen Titans volumes from Interlibrary Loan and talk more about these characters in this series in the future because, as I said, this was my favorite superhero comic back when I was younger.